There's a stadium being built right now that you'll never set foot in. Not because the tickets are sold out, because the tickets were never meant for you. 48 teams, 16 cities, 3 countries, the biggest World Cup in history. And somewhere in a room you've never seen, in a building you can't name, a man you've never heard of just signed a piece of paper that decided which player gets traded, which sponsor gets the front of the jersey, which city gets the final. He's not a player, he's not a coach, he's not even a fan. You know the names they want you to know: Messi, Mbappe, the presidents shaking hands on television, the trophies, the anthems, the fireworks. But the 2026 World Cup isn't really theirs. It belongs to roughly 40 men. Most of them have never kicked a ball in their lives. Some of them have never watched a full match. A few of them, if you passed them on the street, you'd assume were retired accountants. And tonight, I'm going to walk you through who they actually are, what they actually own, and why the most beautiful game on earth has, very quietly, become the most expensive secret in modern history. Stay with me. Let me ask you something, and be honest with yourself. When you watch a World Cup match, who do you think you're watching? You think you're watching a country, 11 men in the same color carrying a flag on their chest, playing for something bigger than themselves. That's the story. That's the story they've been telling you since you were a child sitting too close to the television, your father telling you to move back. It's a beautiful story. And it's not entirely a lie, but it's not entirely true either. Because somewhere between the anthem and the final whistle, between the tears of the captain and the confetti falling on the pitch, there's a layer most people never see. A layer that doesn't wear a jersey, a layer that doesn't get interviewed, a layer that owns the field, owns the broadcast, owns the boots on the player's feet, owns the data on his heart rate, owns the right to replay the goal you just watched. And that layer is who I want to introduce you to tonight. Think about it. A World Cup match lasts 90 minutes. But the deal that put that match on your screen took 10 years to build. 10 years of negotiations in cities you've never visited. Hotel suites in Zurich, boardrooms in Doha, private dinners in Miami where the menu wasn't written down because the conversation wasn't supposed to exist. The men in those rooms aren't villains. I want to be clear about that. Most of them are just very, very good at one thing: recognizing value before anyone else sees it. In the 1970s, football was a working-class sport. Players smoked at halftime. Coaches wore wool sweaters. The biggest clubs in Europe were essentially community organizations, owned by members, run by accountants who took the bus to work. And then something changed. Television happened, then satellite happened, then the internet happened, then sponsorship happened, then sovereign wealth funds happened. And every single time the game got bigger, a small group of people understood, before everyone else, that what they were watching wasn't a sport anymore. It was real estate, it was media, it was data, it was a brand with a built-in audience of 4 billion people who would tune in voluntarily every 4 years and weep at a song. You can't manufacture that. You can only own it. And the men I'm about to walk you through, they own pieces of it. Not the whole thing. Nobody owns the whole thing. But they own enough. Enough that when the ball is kicked off in 2026 in a stadium in New Jersey or Mexico City or Toronto, every single bounce of that ball will, in some small, invisible way, make them richer. Here's the part that gets uncomfortable. They don't hide. Not really. Their names are on filings. Their companies are listed. Their faces appear occasionally in business magazines that nobody reads on the beach. They hide the way the rich have always hidden, in plain sight, behind language so boring that your eyes slide off the page before you finish the sentence. Limited liability holding company, Cayman Islands subsidiary, beneficial ownership structure, sovereign linked investment vehicle. You read those words and you fall asleep. That's the point. The boredom is the camouflage. So tonight, I'm going to translate. I'm going to take the boring language and turn it back into what it actually is, which is a story about power, about patience, about a small group of men who looked at a children's game and saw instead a machine that prints attention. And attention in the 21st century is the only currency that still appreciates. Stay with me, because the next name I'm about to give you, you've never heard. And by the time we're done tonight, you'll never forget it. There's a man who lives most of the year on a street in Geneva that doesn't have a name on the map. Not because the street is secret. Streets aren't secret in Switzerland. But because the building he lives in is registered to a company, and the company is registered to another company, and that company is registered to a foundation. And the foundation, on paper, exists to support the arts. He owns no team. He has never bought a player. If you searched his name on the internet right now, you'd find maybe 4 photographs. In 2 of them, his face is turned away from the camera. And yet, in the world of football, he is, by some measures, the most powerful man alive. Because he owns the rights. Not the rights to a club, not the rights to a league, the rights to broadcast the matches, to sell the highlights, to license the footage, to decide which streaming service in which country, on which continent, gets to show you the goal Mbappé scored in the 87th minute. Every time you watch a replay, somewhere, a fraction of a cent moves, and it moves toward him. This is the part of football that nobody tells you about, because it doesn't make for good television. The actual game, the 90 minutes, is the cheapest part of the whole operation. The expensive part, the truly expensive part, is the right to look at it. And those rights for the 2026 World Cup were sold years ago, carved up like a roast at a long table. A piece for North America, a piece for Latin America, a piece for the Middle East, a piece for Sub-Saharan Africa, a piece for streaming, a piece for short-form clips, a piece for mobile-only viewing in countries where most people don't own a television. Each piece has a price, each price has a buyer, and each buyer, in turn, is owned by someone else. And if you follow the chain back far enough, patiently enough, you arrive at a very small number of holding companies. Some of them based in Luxembourg, some in the Channel Islands, some in places I won't name on camera because the lawyers who represent those places don't have a sense of humor. Now, I want you to picture something. Picture a man at a desk. He's not young. He's not old. He's the age where men stop caring whether they look impressive. He has a glass of water in front of him. No phone, no laptop, just a single sheet of paper. And on that paper, there's a number. And next to the number, there's a signature line. He signs. And in that signature, he has just decided that the World Cup final, the actual final, the 1 billions of people will watch, will be broadcast in a particular country by a particular company at a particular price for the next 12 years. He didn't kick a ball. He didn't coach a team. He didn't sing an anthem. He just signed. And every time someone in that country turns on a television, eats a snack, buys a jersey, downloads an app, places a bet, books a flight to a host city, tips a waiter at a sports bar, some small portion of that energy, that economic energy, gets converted eventually into a number on his ledger. This is how modern football works, not on the field, in the room. And the men in the room have a particular look about them. I've met a few. Not the very top, just the second tier. And the thing that surprises you when you sit across from them is how unremarkable they are. They don't wear loud watches, they don't drive loud cars, they order the chicken, they drink water, they speak in short sentences, and they listen more than they talk. The flash, the gold, the supercars, the yachts in Monaco, that's for the players. That's for the agents. That's for the new money that just arrived and wants the world to know. The old money, the real money, the money that actually owns the World Cup, looks like a retired school teacher. And that's not an accident. That's a choice. Because invisibility at a certain altitude is the most expensive luxury of all. In the next block, I'm going to take you somewhere most football fans never look. I'm going to take you inside the relationship between a player you love, a club you cheer for, and a man you've never heard of who, technically, owns a percentage of that player's right leg. Stay with me. There's a contract I want you to imagine it. It's not very long, maybe 12 pages. It's written in legal English, which is a language designed to be read by nobody except the people who wrote it. The cover page has a name, a player's name, someone you've cheered for, someone whose jersey, maybe, hangs in your son's bedroom. And on page 7 of the contract, there's a clause. The clause says that a certain percentage of any future transfer fee paid for that player will be redirected automatically to a third party. Not the club that developed him, not the club that bought him. A third party, a company, registered often in a country the player has never visited. That third party is a man, or a small group of men, and they own, in the most literal sense the law allows, a slice of a human being's career. This is called third-party ownership. In some leagues, it's banned. In most, it isn't. And in the world of international football, it's the open secret that built the modern game. Here's how it works. A scout somewhere in Brazil or Argentina or Senegal or Croatia finds a 13-year-old. The boy is good, not great yet. But the scout knows what great looks like at 13, and this boy has it. The scout calls a man. The man flies in. The man visits the boy's family. The family lives in a house with a roof that leaks. The man offers them something, not a contract, not yet, just help. Help with the boy's training, help with his nutrition, help with the family's rent. In exchange, the man asks for nothing. Almost nothing, just a small percentage of any future transfer fee should the boy one day become valuable. The family signs. Of course they sign. They have a leaky roof. 5 years pass. The boy becomes a young man. The young man scores a goal in a youth tournament that nobody important is watching, except for the man who is watching from a hotel room in Madrid. Another year passes. A European club calls. They want to buy the boy for 2 million euros. The man who hasn't seen the family in 3 years gets a phone call from a lawyer. The lawyer reminds the European club that 20% of any transfer is owed to a holding company in Malta. The European club pays. The family gets nothing extra. They got their roof years ago. The man gets 400,000 euros for a phone call he didn't make. Now, I want you to be careful here, because the easy thing to do is to make this man a villain, and he isn't. Not exactly. He spotted talent when nobody else did. He invested in a child when no professional club would. He took a risk. The market rewarded the risk. That's how every market on earth has ever worked. But there is something else going on, something that is harder to name. When you watch a transfer announcement on television and the camera shows the player smiling in his new jersey and the commentator says, "A club record signing, 97 million euros," you are not looking at a transaction between two clubs. You are looking at a transaction between maybe 7 different parties: the selling club, the buying club, the agent's holding company, the image rights company, the third-party investor who owns a percentage, and sometimes a sovereign fund somewhere that financed the whole thing through a credit line nobody discusses. The player smiles, holds up the jersey, says he's living his dream. And he is. That part is real. That smile is real. But the smile is also simultaneously a financial event, a liquidity moment, a point on a graph that in some office in London or Lisbon or Dubai just turned green. Here's what I want you to understand. The men who profit from this don't hate football. A lot of them love it. They watch matches. They have favorite teams. Some of them grew up poor, watching the same World Cups you did, on the same flickering screens, dreaming the same dreams. The difference is, at some point, they stopped watching the players and started watching the structure around the players. And they noticed that the structure had no owner. It had only operators, people moving the pieces. And they thought, quietly to themselves, someone is going to own this. It might as well be me. And they were right. For the 2026 World Cup, there will be matches where, on the field, you'll see 22 players. And in the financial structure behind those 22 players, there will be hundreds of invisible stakeholders: funds, trusts, investment vehicles, family offices in Switzerland that were founded before either of the players' grandfathers were born. When the player scores, you'll cheer. The crowd will roar. The commentator will scream his name. And in a quiet office somewhere, a number will tick upward by a tiny amount. And nobody except the man watching the number will ever know. In the next block, I'm going to take you up one more level, past the agents, past the third-party investors, to the men who don't own players. They own the leagues that own the players. And one of them, you'll be surprised to learn, has never given a single interview in his life. Stay with me. There's a floor in a building in London. The building has no sign. The floor has no logo on the wall when the elevator opens. There's a receptionist. She's polite. She asks who you're there to see, and if you don't have an appointment, she smiles and tells you that you must have the wrong address. You don't have the wrong address. On that floor, decisions are made about which countries can host which tournaments, which broadcasters can show which matches, which sponsors can put their logo on which corner flag, which player, fundamentally, is allowed to play in which league. The men on that floor don't own a club. They own something larger. They own the right to decide who gets to own clubs. They own the rules. And in any system, the people who own the rules are wealthier, quieter, and more powerful than the people who play within them. I want to tell you about a particular kind of man. Because if you understand him, you understand the entire economy of modern football. He's usually in his 60s, sometimes 70s. He started decades ago in something boring. Insurance, maybe? Shipping? Commodities trading? He made his first fortune in a sector you don't think about when you wake up in the morning. Iron ore, telecommunications licenses, petroleum logistics. The kind of business where the margins are small but the volumes are enormous, and where, after 20 years of compounding, you wake up one morning and realize you have more money than several small countries combined. And then, somewhere around the year 2000, give or take, he met a man at a dinner. The man at the dinner ran a football league. The league was struggling. The league needed capital. The league had, on paper, a brand worth nothing and an audience worth everything. The man with the iron ore fortune looked at the league and saw what nobody else could see. He saw that the league was not, fundamentally, a sports product. It was a content business. And content businesses, in the early 2000s, were about to experience the largest pricing revolution in human history. He invested, quietly, not in the league directly, in the holding company that owned the broadcast rights to the league, in the marketing arm that handled the league's international distribution, in the commercial subsidiary that licensed the league's logo to manufacturers in Asia. 25 years later, the league is worth 50 times what it was when he found it. He owns no club. He has never bought a player. His name does not appear on any team sheet, but every Saturday when matches are played, money flows, and a percentage of that flow ends up in accounts he controls. This is the model, and it has been replicated with small variations at every level of the global game. For the 2026 World Cup, the men who occupy this layer are not the names you read about in the sports section. They are not the federation presidents shaking hands at the draw ceremony. The federation presidents are, in many cases, employees, public-facing executives. They smile, they give speeches, they hand out trophies, and then they go back to their offices and answer phone calls from the men who actually decide things. I want to be careful here. I'm not telling you this to make you cynical. Cynicism is the easiest thing in the world. Anyone can be cynical. It costs nothing. It builds nothing. I'm telling you this because I think you deserve to understand the real shape of the thing you love. When you love something, you should know what it is. Not the postcard version, the actual version. The one with the wires in the back and the dust on the floor and the men in the room making decisions while the music plays in the foreground. Football is still beautiful. The game itself is still the game. A ball, a pitch, a goal, a moment. None of that has changed since you were a child. But around the game, in concentric rings, there is now an entire economy. And that economy has owners. And those owners, increasingly, are not from the country whose flag is being held up. They are not from the city whose stadium is being filled. They are global. They are mobile. They are diversified. They live in 3 time zones and pay taxes in none of them. The 2026 World Cup will generate, by some estimates, more than $10 billion in direct revenue. Tickets, broadcasting, sponsorship, merchandise, hospitality, and the indirect economy around it, the hotels, the airlines, the bars, the betting markets, the data licensing, the streaming subscriptions, the social media advertising will generate several times that. Out of that ocean of money, a small fraction will go to the players. A larger fraction will go to the federations. A larger fraction still will go to the broadcasters and sponsors and licensees. And the largest fraction of all will go to the men whose names will not appear on any list, whose photographs will not be printed in any magazine, who will watch the final, if they watch it at all, from a private box where the windows are tinted and the door is locked. In the next block, I want to take you somewhere even fewer people look. Inside the sovereign-level money. The countries, not the men. Because some of the largest owners of the modern World Cup are not people at all. They are nations. And nations, when they invest, do not invest the way you and I do. Stay with me. There's a moment in the modern history of football that historians will eventually mark as the turning point. And most fans missed it when it happened. It wasn't a goal. It wasn't a final. It wasn't a transfer. It was a press release, a short one. Issued on a Thursday afternoon in late summer by a law firm representing a buyer based in the Gulf. The press release announced that a club, a perfectly ordinary club, in a perfectly ordinary city, had been acquired by an investment vehicle linked indirectly to a sovereign wealth fund. A sovereign wealth fund. Read those 3 words again. A sovereign wealth fund is not a person. It's not a family. It's not even a company in the way you and I understand companies. It's a country's savings account, the accumulated multi-generational wealth of a nation, sometimes built from oil, sometimes from gas, sometimes from manufacturing, sometimes from sitting on top of a strait that every cargo ship in the world has to pass through. And once one country did it, every other country with money started paying attention. Because here's what they noticed. The country that bought the club, almost overnight, became visible. Not just to football fans, to everyone. Diplomats started taking the country's calls faster. Tourists started visiting. Universities started signing partnership agreements. The country's airline, which had existed for 30 years in obscurity, suddenly had route requests from cities it had never been allowed to land in. The club was a Trojan horse. The football was the vehicle. The cargo was the country itself. And the men who designed this strategy, and they were men in rooms in capitals you can name, understood something that took the rest of the world another decade to figure out. They understood that football in the 21st century was the only product on Earth that could deliver simultaneously 4 billion impressions in over 200 countries, in every language, every single week, for 90 minutes at a time. There is no advertising campaign that can buy that. There is no diplomatic mission that can deliver that. There is no military parade, no cultural festival, no Olympic Games that comes close. A football club, owned by a country, broadcasts that country into every living room on Earth, every weekend, forever. The 2026 World Cup is the final stage of this strategy. Because at this World Cup, you will not just see countries playing other countries, you will see countries playing inside countries. You will see clubs owned by sovereign funds, supplying players to national teams. You will see broadcast rights owned by state-linked media companies, carrying the matches into countries whose own state-linked media companies own the rights to retransmit them. You will see sponsorships paid for by airlines, paid for by ministries of tourism, paid for, ultimately, by populations who never voted on whether they wanted their nation's wealth invested in a tournament half a world away. And this is where football gets philosophically strange. Because the line between a private investor and a country is, increasingly, indistinguishable. A man owns a fund. The fund owns a club. The fund is financed by a national bank. The national bank is owned by a ministry. The ministry reports to a head of state. The head of state in some countries is also the largest single beneficiary of the fund. So when a goal is scored in a stadium in front of 80,000 people, who exactly is profiting? The player is profiting. That's clear. He gets a bonus. The club is profiting. That's clear too. The match win adds value to the brand. But behind the club, there's a fund. And behind the fund, there's a sovereign. And behind the sovereign, there's a population. A population that, for the most part, has no idea that a goal scored in New Jersey on a Tuesday night just added a fraction of a percent to the value of a national investment portfolio they collectively own and individually cannot access. Football has become a sovereign instrument, a tool of statecraft, as real as a treaty, as subtle as a song. And here is where I want to ask you something honest. Because I'm not telling you any of this to make you angry. I'm not telling you this to ruin your enjoyment of the game. I love this game. I have loved it my entire life. I will love it long after this video is forgotten. But I think there's a kind of love that pretends, and there's a kind of love that sees clearly. And the second kind is harder, but it lasts longer. Because it isn't built on illusion. It's built on the actual thing. The actual thing is this. The World Cup is, simultaneously, the most beautiful and the most expensive cultural event in human history. It's a children's game, and it's a financial instrument, and it's a diplomatic tool, and it's a media product, and it's a religion, all at once, all in the same 90 minutes. You can hold all of those truths at the same time. You don't have to pick one. In the next block, I want to bring this all the way home. Because there's a final layer, a layer above even the sovereign funds. A layer that very few people in the world will ever see, but which is, quietly, where the real decisions about the future of football are being made. Stay with me. If you've made it this far in the video with me, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and follow along with us. Every week we go into stories like this one, stories that take a thing you thought you understood and turn it slowly until you see the side of it nobody shows you. If that's the kind of thing you want more of, the subscribe button is right there. It costs you nothing, and it tells me to keep making these. And honestly, I think people who watch videos this long are a particular kind of person. You're not here for highlights. You're not here for hot takes. You're here because somewhere inside you, there's a quiet curiosity. A willingness to sit with something complicated for an hour and let it change the way you see things. That's rare. And I notice it. So thank you for being here. Now, let me take you to the top, above the agents, above the third-party investors, above the league owners, above the sovereign wealth funds. There is one more layer, and it's the thinnest of all. It's a handful of men, scattered across maybe 4 cities, who don't really own anything in particular. They own access. They own relationships. They own the ability to make a phone call on a Sunday evening and have it answered on the first ring by anyone in global football. They are sometimes called consultants, sometimes called advisors, sometimes called partners. The titles are deliberately vague, because what they do isn't really a job, it's a position in a network. I'll describe one of them to you. I won't name him, because naming him serves no purpose, and the description is more useful than the label. He's in his late 60s. He grew up in a port city in southern Europe. His father was a fisherman or a baker or something honest. He went into law in his 20s. Sports law, a boring specialty at the time. Nobody respected it. He spent 15 years writing contracts that nobody read for clients nobody had heard of. And then television money arrived in football. And suddenly, the contracts he had been writing, the ones nobody read, became the most valuable documents in the sport. Because he had been writing them for 15 years. He knew the loopholes. He knew the precedents. He knew which jurisdictions enforced which clauses and which ones quietly didn't. He became, almost without trying, indispensable. Federations called him, clubs called him, players called him, broadcasters called him. Sovereign funds, when they entered the game, called him first, before they signed anything. Today, he doesn't bill by the hour. He doesn't bill at all in the traditional sense. He takes equity, small percentages, in dozens of structures, a fraction of a club, a fraction of an image rights company, a fraction of a media holding, a fraction of a stadium operator, a fraction of a hospitality concession. If you added up all his fractions, you would not get a controlling stake in anything, but you would get a position from which the entire global game becomes, to him, legible. He can read it the way you and I read a menu. And there are maybe 10 men like him on Earth, maybe 15. They know each other. They have known each other for 30 years. They go on holiday in the same regions. Their children attend the same boarding schools. They are not friends, exactly, but they are colleagues in the deepest sense of the word. When a major decision is made about football, a real decision, the kind that changes the structure of the game for a decade, those men are consulted, not always formally, sometimes a phone call, sometimes a dinner, sometimes just a nod across a room at an event nobody photographed. The 2026 World Cup, in its current form, exists because that small network of men over the last 15 years decided it should. They didn't decide it in a meeting. There was no vote. There is no document you can find. But the format, the host countries, the broadcast structure, the sponsorship architecture, the qualification system, the prize money distribution, all of it was shaped gradually by conversations among people who, mostly, are not employed by any football institution. This is not a conspiracy. I want to be very clear about that. A conspiracy implies secrecy and coordination and intent. What I'm describing is something stranger and more ordinary. It's a network. The same kind of network that shapes finance and media and pharmaceuticals and energy. People who know each other, who trust each other, who share information, who move slowly, who think in decades. The conspiracy, if there is one, is just competence, patience, and the willingness to be invisible. And here's the part that I think is worth sitting with for a moment. You and I, when we watch the World Cup, watch a match, 90 minutes. We feel something. We cheer, we curse, we celebrate, we grieve. The match ends and we go on with our lives. The men I just described don't watch the matches that way. They watch the tournament, the whole tournament, as a single object. A 4-week event that, when it concludes, will have produced a measurable change in the global economy, in the geopolitical standing of certain nations, in the asset values of certain holdings, and in the trajectories of certain players whose contracts they happen to have a piece of. 2 ways of watching the same game. Both real, both true. In the final block, I want to bring all of this together. Because there's a question underneath everything I've told you tonight. A question I haven't asked yet, and it's the question that I think actually matters. Stay with me. So here we are, at the end. I've spent the last hour walking you through a structure. The agents, the third-party investors, the league owners, the sovereign funds, the small network of men at the top, the ones whose names you'll never know. And if you're like me, by this point in the video, you might be feeling something complicated. A little smaller, maybe. A little more aware of how much of the thing you love is, in the end, owned by people who are not you. People who will never know your name. People who will never sit on your couch on a Sunday afternoon, with the lights low and the children quiet, watching the match the way you watch the match. I want to leave you with something. Not advice, not a lesson, just an observation. The men I described tonight, the billionaires, the fund managers, the network at the top, they own the structure. They own the rights. They own the percentages. They own the leagues and the broadcasts and the hospitality concessions and the data feeds. But there is one thing in the entire economy of football that they have never been able to buy. They cannot buy what you feel. When the goal goes in the 87th minute, and you stand up off the couch without thinking, and your hand goes to your head, and your voice makes a sound you didn't plan. That sound, that particular sound, is not on any ledger. It is not in any holding company. It is not licensed to any broadcaster. It belongs completely to you. When your father, 10 years ago, put his hand on your shoulder during a final and didn't say anything and didn't need to, that moment is not an asset. It cannot be purchased. It cannot be sold. It cannot be moved into a tax-efficient jurisdiction. When you teach your son the offside rule badly in the kitchen with a salt shaker and 2 coffee cups, that lesson is not a transaction. Nobody profits from it. Nobody owns it. It's just yours. The men at the top of the pyramid have built something extraordinary. I won't pretend they haven't. They have constructed, over the course of 50 years, the most efficient attention machine in human history. And they will continue to refine it, long after this World Cup, long after the next one, long after I'm gone, and long after you're gone too. But the machine, as enormous as it is, runs on something it cannot manufacture. It runs on caring. On the irrational, inherited, almost embarrassing love that people like you and me have for a game that doesn't, on paper, deserve any of it. Without that love, the machine has nothing. The broadcast rights are worthless. The sponsorships collapse. The sovereign funds withdraw. The whole pyramid, all the way to the top, disappears. So when you watch the 2026 World Cup and the camera pans across a stadium full of people in the colors of their country, and the anthem plays, and the captain has his hand on his chest, and the children in the front row are crying because they don't understand yet why they're crying, remember this: you are not the audience. You are the asset. But you are the only asset that gets to choose what it feels. That's not nothing. In a system this large, that might be the only real freedom left. That's everything I had for tonight. If this video gave you something, anything, a thought you didn't have when you started watching, share it with 5 people, just 5. People you actually talk to. People who watch football the way you do. Send it to them and let them sit with it the way you did. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. We do this every week. Slow stories, long videos, things that take time to say properly. And in the comments, I want you to do something specific for me. Tell me, honestly, after watching this, do you love the game more or less? There's no wrong answer. I want to know. Read the other comments too. You'll learn something. And while you're down there, tell me what you want me to look into next. The hidden economics of something else you love. A player, a club, a city, a tournament. The next video on this channel might be one you suggested. Until then, take care of the people in your living room. They're the only part of all this that's actually yours.